Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe, and I'm excited to kick off the very first online educational offering for Bounty and Soul. I was originally scheduled to give this talk in person, but as with so many things these days, that in-person educational series is on hold, so it's provided the impetus to try out this new online platform. So I'm really excited to be here, and I hope you find value in what I have to share. First of all, I just want to share where I'm coming from. So I work with an ally organization to Bounty and Soul called Wild Abundance. You can check us out, Wild Abundance Facebook page after the video. Go and check it out and like us and follow us for more of this kind of useful information. Wild Abundance is a school of permaculture, natural building, carpentry, and general skills for self-sufficiency, also near Asheville, North Carolina, just sort of on the other side of Asheville from our local Bounty and Soul. And I am an instructor there, as well as I write the blog, which you can check out, and I'm one of the administrators and kind of strategic organizers for the school. So yeah, check out the classes that we have to offer and the free resources that we provide as well, which are many and useful. And another thing, I just want to say that I am not a licensed medical professional. I'm going to be talking today about everyday anti-inflammatory herbs, as well as lifestyle choices that you can do to decrease inflammation and just increase overall health in your life. But all of this information that I share is for educational purposes only. I'm not trying to give you medical advice, and anything that I share here is not to be used in place of professional medical advice. If you have any kind of medical condition that has to do with inflammation or not, please seek the appropriate medical care and just use this as informational support as you continue on your journey towards health and healing. So that being said, I'm going to start out by talking about inflammation in general, inflammation in the body. So this is a term that a lot of us have heard, especially recently, and it's kind of a little bit demonized in my opinion. So people can tend to think of inflammation as like a problem or a bad thing, but I want to give you a little bit of background, and I want to assure you that inflammation and the inflammatory process in the body is actually quite natural and quite necessary for our bodies to maintain balance and to heal from injury and stress and disease. So inflammation is kind of what it sounds like, inflame, like to get hot, to be on fire. And this is what the body does when it experiences stress. So stress for the body can mean the emotional kind of stress that we usually associate with that word, but it can also mean stress like getting, hitting your thumb with a hammer when you're nailing something, or twisting your ankle, or getting a splinter, getting a cut, or getting a sickness, a pathogen in your body like a virus or bacterial or something like that. So when these things happen, when your body experiences this kind of stress, it mounts an inflammatory response in order to bring the immune system and the white blood cells and the sort of the fix-it crew to the area that has been damaged by the stress. So let's just go with the example of straining your ankle, for example, spraining your ankle. So you're walking along, you trip, you strain your ankle, it hurts, right? And then soon thereafter, it probably feels tender around that area. It might be hot, it might be swelling, it might look red, and that's a natural inflammatory response. So in a way, what's happening is your body is bringing a lot of heat, bringing a lot of immune cells to that area. And the swelling and the tenderness also has to do with cutting off the circulation and the movement from that area to the rest of the body. So it's almost like when you see a work crew on a road and they put up cones around where they're working, and you can't drive there while they're working on fixing it. And that can cause some congestion in the surrounding area because the natural flow is not allowed to happen in that area, but they're doing that so they can do their job, so that they can fix the road. So that's an imperfect metaphor, but it gives you a sense of what's going on in a natural, healthy, inflammatory process in the body. Now, this can happen in that kind of situation where you strain your ankle, but it can also happen internally, for example, in your joints or in your blood cells or in your lungs or different parts of your body. So when the natural inflammatory process sort of continues its natural arc, your body becomes inflamed, and then when the damage has been repaired to the degree that it needs to be, then the workers, so to speak, remove the orange cones, they get their equipment out of there, and the natural flow is returned to the area. So there's an anti-inflammatory process that cools things down, that soothes things, that brings everything back into balance. So with a strained ankle or a sprained ankle, the inflammatory process happens. Ideally, you get off of your feet, you rest, you might put some ice, you might rub an ointment on there, you might rest for a while, you might put your leg above your head or above your heart so that there's less pressure on that area. And then, in a day to a couple of days, you feel better. And you don't have to do anything special other than not continuing to inflame the area. You can just let the process happen naturally. So that's sort of a background on inflammation and the balance between inflammation and anti-inflammation in the body. So part of why we've heard so much about inflammation and it's been so demonized recently is that there are a lot of lifestyle choices and diet choices that we as a whole I'm in North America, so modern American culture, are making that cause kind of an unchecked inflammatory response and an unnatural inflammatory response. So we're stressing our bodies in daily ways that are not an out of the ordinary experience, like straining an ankle or getting sick and then getting well. We're doing things like eating a lot of processed foods, which put a daily strain on our digestive system and on the whole rest of our body because we're taking in foreign material, foreign compounds that haven't naturally been in our food system, that our body has not evolved to process, and we're taking in toxins with those. And so our whole system is under a low-grade stress day after day after day. And as a result, inflammation can happen throughout the body or in particular systems like the GI or the joints or the lungs or different parts of the body, depending on a lot of factors, including your bio-individuality. So that's a good term to know, just how your body functions. We're all unique in terms of our genetics and our backgrounds and how our body responds to things. So the result of these modern sort of stress-inducing lifestyle and diet choices is runaway inflammation in the body. And that's something that a lot of people are experiencing these days. Some diseases that are basically attributed to or can be looked at through the lens of a runaway inflammatory process are various forms of arthritis, including rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis. Inflammation is a part of basically every arthritic process. Also diabetes and blood sugar issues. Part of why those diseases are destructive is because of the inflammatory response that they trigger in the body, and that becomes chronic in the body. A lot of heart conditions and heart diseases also have a huge inflammatory component to them. So inflammation plays a huge role particularly in chronic and degenerative diseases, which are really increasing and on the rise, particularly here in North America. So people are becoming more and more interested in anti-inflammatory things that we can do. So anti-inflammatory herbs, anti-inflammatory foods, lifestyle choices that can reduce inflammation and generally calming down inflammation. And this is great, and this is a great place to be looking, but I just wanted to give that background of the natural role of the inflammatory process so that we can understand inflammation and the inflammatory process themselves are not negative things, are not the bad guys, are not necessarily cause for alarm. They're actually very important natural processes for our body's own healing, but where many of us have gotten, is out of balance with those processes. So I want to talk a little bit about lifestyle choices that we can make that are easy and that are free, that don't cost any money, that can reduce inflammation in our bodies. So one of those choices is just all of these generally have to do with stress reduction. So overall stress that we're experiencing can lead to increased inflammation in our bodies. So there are a lot of really simple, easy, free things that we can do to reduce stress. One of them is taking a deep breath, which I invite you all to do right now. So just breathe in all the way, down into your belly, down into your toes, and breathe out. And in doing this, even just like a couple, 2 or 3 breaths, a few times a day can really help to reduce stress, and can also put your attention to how much stress is in your body and where the stress is in your body. So just pausing, you can even set a timer on your phone, every hour or every 2 or 3 hours throughout the day. You can do it while you're at work. You could go in the bathroom if it's weird to do this, in an office if you share space with other people. But just taking a moment to fill your lungs with oxygen and to bring your awareness to your body can help reduce that runaway inflammatory process and help reduce the stress load that almost all of us are carrying, and especially right now with this crisis going on and life kind of in upheaval. So taking deep breaths, free, easy, very effective. Another thing is getting enough sleep, which can be easier for some and harder for some, but just really making that a priority in your life can have a huge impact. And some simple ways to increase your sleep hygiene or the effectiveness of your sleep regimen is to go to bed at the same time each night, to stop eating at least 2 hours before you go to bed, and to wake up at the same time each morning. And, a lot of us have a lot to do, and we feel stressed out, so it's difficult to fall asleep, and there's lots of reasons why many people don't get enough sleep. But if you really think about it as a measure to protect your health and something that you need to work to protect, then that can kind of shift the mentality around sleep and sleep hygiene, and hopefully bring you into a space where you can have improved sleep in your day-to-day life. So another thing actually that I should mention about sleep hygiene is cutting off screen time. So not looking at screens, cell phones, or computers for an hour or two before your decided bedtime. That can make a huge difference, because the blue light and just the stimulation of looking at the screen right before bed really stimulates your brain and makes it hard to calm down and get into that restful state. So some other things, another simple thing is drinking enough water. So part of how the anti-inflammatory process works in the body, so in that example of the sprained ankle, there are going to be some metabolites, some waste products of that damage, and also of that immune sort of cleanup crew that comes to the sprained ankle. And any sort of waste products, toxins, byproducts of that process need to be cleared out of the body. And one of the biggest ways that we clear toxins or metabolic waste from our body is through our feces and our urine. And ultimately that comes first through the blood and then out through the feces and the urine. And in order for that whole process of moving waste products out of the body to function smoothly, we need to stay hydrated. Staying hydrated means that our organ systems are not stressed, and also means that there's plenty of fluid. Fluid is like if you think of like the public transportation system, and if we don't have enough fluid in our body, it's like there aren't enough buses to carry everyone to where they need to go. And again, another imperfect metaphor, but I like using imagery that we can really relate to understand these concepts that are happening inside of our body. So just drinking enough water, a really basic recommendation for drinking water is you take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's the number of ounces of water that you need to drink, ideally each day. And bring into consideration if you exercise or it's hot or you sweat, then you can increase that a little bit. And also if you take diuretics into your body like coffee or tea or soda, even some herbal teas are diuretic, then you can increase your just fresh, clean water intake as well. Some other examples of simple, easy, and free anti-inflammatory lifestyle choices that we can make are movement. And I specifically use that word movement instead of exercise, because sometimes we can get, our culture is can be a little exercise obsessed. And there's a connection between like exercise and like strenuous working out, building muscle, losing fat. There's kind of this whole milieu that we associate with the word exercise, whereas movement is just moving your body. It can mean working out, exercising really hard, riding a bike up a steep mountain. It can also mean just simply taking a walk, or, dancing by yourself for 10 minutes, at the beginning of your lunch break or something like that. But moving your body, allowing your body to move, again, facilitates that natural process of movement, both of nutrients in and metabolic waste products and toxins out of the body. And that helps with the natural anti-inflammatory process that your body's already going through. So in that, dancing is a wonderful way of movement, riding a bike, taking a walk, swimming, whatever kind of movement works for you. And another one is singing. So there have been a bunch of studies actually that show that singing, particularly in groups, can reduce stress and reduce inflammation in the body. Not reduce inflammation in the sense of like at a clinical level, but generally calm the system and reduce those issues. So there's a wonderful community choir here near Asheville called Hark. You can look that up, H-A-R-K. If you're not in Asheville, there may be a community choir near you, or just singing along to the radio, any kind of singing. And that also facilitates those deep breaths, those deep belly breaths, and it's just fun and can lighten your mood. And the final thing that's kind of incorporated in a lot of these is just play. So playing is good for stress reduction and often incorporates deep breathing and movement and some of these other things. So whether that's playing with the young children in your life, with your pet, playing with other adults, whatever kind of play works for you, silly games or outdoor activities, those are really wonderful ways to help reduce stress and ultimately curb that runaway train of inflammation that a lot of us are experiencing in modern life. So I wanted to start with those just because they're simple and easy and affordable. They don't cost any money, and they're just basically, they depend on our choice, our decision-making process to put ourselves and our health at the forefront and to value ourselves and our health and to put energy into that. And everybody has access to that, even in small ways in the day-to-day. So now I'm going to go into talking about some anti-inflammatory herbs. So oftentimes when you think about herbs and herbal medicine, we kind of think about going to the clinic or going to the store and getting tinctures or other kinds of extracts, getting herbs in capsules, and kind of looking at herbal medicine as a natural analog to pharmaceutical medicine. So herbs coming in as a treatment to a disease or something that will reduce symptoms of a disease. But in fact, herbal medicine is much more than that. So I'm not a clinical herbalist, but I've been studying herbalism for over a decade, and I incorporate it into my life in just simple day-to-day ways. And I would be surprised if those of you listening are not also herbalists in your own right. So herbs are something that we just naturally incorporate into our cooking, into the food that we eat. If we drink tea, whether it be from a tea bag or home steeped tea, there's lots of ways that herbs can sort of easily come into our lives. And it doesn't have to be this lifelong study. We don't have to have a clinical practice. We don't necessarily have to consult an herbalist, although I really encourage you to if you're having an acute condition. But in terms of just supporting general health and using herbs as tonics and as adjuncts to healthy lifestyle choices, this is something that's accessible to all of us, and many of us are already doing. So the herbs that I'm going to speak of today are all used as culinary herbs. So they should be pretty familiar to everyone, and you're probably already taking them in small amounts. And one of the things you can do is just increase the amount that you take of these herbs and just have awareness of the many properties that they have. Another thing to mention about herbs and herbal medicine is that a wonderful thing about herbs and plants in general is that they're very complex. So when we think about medicine, sometimes we think in this reductionist mindset of looking at single compounds or a couple of compounds that will have a particular action on a particular body system. And herbs have been studied in that way, and I'll mention how those studies have shown up for some of these herbs that I'm going to talk about. But in general, plants and what are considered to be herbal medicine plants have a lot going on. They're usually doing more than one thing and have many, many, many compounds, some of which we understand and we've studied and some of which we don't, that are working together to have beneficial impacts on our bodies and our health. And so that's a wonderful thing because it's part of how we can take herbs in a tonic way or in a day-to-day maintenance kind of way, and they can just boost up our system, not just in terms of reducing inflammation, which is kind of the goal and the purpose of this conversation, but in terms of supporting other systems in our body to be in more optimal health too. So the first one I'm going to talk about, probably you've all heard of as an anti-inflammatory herb, and it's turmeric. Turmeric is a yellow-orange colored rhizome, which is basically part of a root. It's kind of like ginger. It looks a lot like ginger, which is a rhizome, an underground storage organ botanically. It's what a rhizome is. It's not technically a root. And turmeric has a compound in it called curcumin. And curcumin is something that you can get in capsule form, in extract form, and has been studied extensively for its anti-inflammatory properties. And there have been some studies that compare it head to head with pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories, and it stands up to the test. So curcumin is a very powerful compound and is a very strong anti-inflammatory. Some other properties of turmeric as a whole and curcumin as a specific compound are that it is antioxidant and maybe anti-tumor as well. So the thing with curcumin and with turmeric is that while this is a very potent and strong compound, it's very difficult to absorb. So it's hard for our bodies to take in. When we eat something, it goes down our esophagus, gets broken down somewhat in our stomach, and then in the small and then large intestines, particularly in the small intestines, that food or herb is taken apart into the small, very small compounds, constituent parts that end up getting absorbed into our bloodstream and used by our body. And so that process for curcumin on its own is kind of difficult. Our body doesn't do it very well, and it has not a very good absorption rate, and it has a strong rate of release. So our body doesn't hold on to it very well. And a couple of things that you can do to increase the absorption of curcumin when you're eating either curcumin as a supplement or turmeric as an herbal medicine or as a culinary herb, as a seasoning, are to combine turmeric and black pepper. Black pepper is another anti-inflammatory herb that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So there's a compound in black pepper called piperine that helps our body absorb the curcumin more effectively. Fortunately, their flavors also go really well together. They're traditionally eaten together. So that's an easy way to do that. And another thing is that curcumin is fat soluble. So some people will suggest that you make a turmeric tea, and it's golden and it's tasty, and that's a nice thing to do. But eating turmeric without also eating some fat is not as effective as eating turmeric with some fat. So fortunately, a lot of the traditional dishes that include turmeric, like curries and stews and things like that, usually have fat in them, whether it's ghee or butter or cream or coconut cream. Anything that is high in fat that does well with your system is nice to combine with turmeric and increases the effectiveness and the absorption of that curcumin, which is the anti-inflammatory molecule compound. One of them. There are probably more that we haven't studied, but that's the one that's been studied. So my favorite ways to consume turmeric are in golden milk, and that's something you can find recipes out there for the exact ratios, and you can just experiment with yourself. But basically, it's taking either raw or dried turmeric root, grating it up if you have a whole root, into some milk. And I use dairy milk because my body does well with that, but not everybody's body does well with dairy. So you can use coconut milk or almond milk or hemp milk or whatever kind of milk works well for you. And I like to add some black pepper to that because I like the spice, and also it increases that absorption. And there's some other seasonings. I like to add cinnamon too, which is another anti-inflammatory herb that I'll talk about in a minute. And just simmer that on low for about 30 minutes to an hour, and that will infuse the milk with the turmeric and any other herbs you put in it. And then you can choose. Turmeric is a little bit bitter. Some people really enjoy the bitterness. Some people want to sweeten it up with a little bit of honey or maple syrup or something like that. So that's just something you can experiment with and add a sweetener to taste. But that's a lovely drink. It's nice. Most people drink it warm, but it's also nice cold. And it's something that you can just include into your daily regimen, especially in the winter with that warming golden milk. Is very nice. And what I do is I make like a half-gallon batch at a time, because it is a process, to pour it in the pot and grate up the turmeric and do the whole thing. And so I'd rather make a bunch ahead of time and then use it throughout the next few days rather than make a cup each time I want to drink it. And my other favorite way to eat turmeric is just in curry. So traditionally, a lot of Indian curry powders, even if you just want to buy a powder and not deal with the whole fresh root, are pretty high in turmeric. You can look on curry powder is just kind of a catch-all term, so that isn't a particular thing. There's lots of different herbs and spices that can be included in a curry powder, and so just look at the ingredients and make sure that turmeric is up there. And if it's a bright orange powder, then it's likely that it's high in turmeric. And just a really simple way to make a curry is to simmer, saute garlic and ginger and fresh turmeric if you have it in some oil, butter, or ghee, or coconut oil are my favorite choices. And then pour in a can of coconut milk, mix in some curry powder. I like to add tomato paste and vegetables and meat of choice, and just let that simmer. Eat it on its own or over rice or quinoa or another grain, and it's pretty simple and pretty delicious. So the next one that I want to talk about that's an anti-inflammatory herb that I'm sure you've all heard of are chili peppers. So chili peppers, all kinds of chili peppers, so cayenne, but other kinds, anchos, serranos, guajillos, whatever kind of chili peppers you like to eat, all contain a compound called capsaicin or capsaicin. They're different, I've heard it pronounced in different ways. And this, it's interesting, can act as an inflammatory compound. So I'm sure you felt in cutting up chili peppers that heat that you feel, and sometimes pain in your fingertips or if you touch your eye after cutting up chili peppers. But internally and externally, actually, it can act as an anti-inflammatory and an analgesic. So that's a pain reducer. And it also may be an anti-tumor compound that induces apoptosis, which is programmed cell death of fast-growing cells such as tumor cells. So that's an interesting one of those other qualities that this multifaceted plant, herb, and food has. So some people have a fine time eating and digesting and enjoying chilies, and some people really don't. I know I, for one, really enjoy spicy food, and my partner and my son, like, it really causes gastrointestinal distress for them. So that's another one of those areas where our bioindividuality is really going to come into play. So if you're somebody who just really doesn't like chilies, I wouldn't force yourself to eat them because they have these anti-inflammatory properties. But if you do like chilies, then you can consider that they have these anti-inflammatory properties and maybe increase your consumption. So my favorite ways of eating chili peppers are just having hot sauce on hand. And a lot of the hot sauce that you can buy at the store contains preservatives, and it's actually pretty easy to make on your own. There's some great hot sauces out there, especially in the natural food stores, that don't contain preservatives. But you can literally just simmer fresh chilies in a little bit of water, add vinegar, salt, garlic if you like, and blend it up in the blender. You can play around with the ratios depending on how spicy the chilies are and just the flavor that you're going for. You could add, some people add ginger. That's kind of a more, like in different countries in Asia, ginger is often added to spicy chili sauce. You could add cumin or other spices that are commonly used in traditional Latino cooking in Mexico and South America. There's lots of ways, cilantro, there's lots of ways that you can experiment with making your own hot sauce, but it's pretty easy. And with that vinegar, it'll stay fresh in the fridge for quite a while. And it's cheaper to make it yourself, obviously, than to buy it. And another really simple way to eat more chili peppers is to make a chili salt. So if you get dried chilies, basically just take a bunch of dried chilies, and if you want to have it be really spicy, then leave the seeds in. And if you want a lot of that flavor with a little bit less of the spice, you can remove the seeds from the dried chilies with gloved hands if you're particularly sensitive or if they're extremely hot chilies. And in a spice grinder or a mortar and pestle, just grind up those dried chilies with some salt. About 50-50 chilies and salt is a great mix, and then put that in a sealed jar, and you can sprinkle that on your food. And that's nice if you don't want to go through the process of making a hot sauce. And you can just have it, with your salt and pepper and any other little garnishes that you have, and sprinkle it on any food that you want to add a little heat to and a little bit of that anti-inflammatory capsaicin to. So, and obviously also chilies and curry is another great addition. So you can combine the turmeric, ginger, garlic, which has its own anti-inflammatory properties, and the chili. Let's see. Black pepper is the next one I want to talk about, and I've talked about it a little bit with that piperine compound helping our bodies to absorb the curcumin, which is the anti-inflammatory compound in turmeric. And black pepper on its own is a pretty strong anti-inflammatory. It's also an analgesic, so it means it's a painkiller, and it's been studied to have antioxidant properties, which these other herbs also have antioxidant properties, gastroprotective properties, so that means it's soothing and protective to the gastrointestinal tract, and even antidepressant properties, which is very interesting. I have to look into that a little more. So I don't think I need to say much about how to use pepper in the diet. It's pretty common in North America. It's interesting to note that it also has antimicrobial properties. So a lot of the herbs that we use culinarily have traditionally been added to food in order to help preserve them. So antimicrobial properties means that a plant or an herb or a compound reduces the proliferation of microbes, including bacteria that would spoil food. And so adding these herbs to food before the age of refrigeration and other kinds of food preservation, modern food preservation that we have now, actually increased the shelf life of food and helped keep it safe and fresh for longer. And they just happen to also be delicious and to increase the absorbability of different compounds and also increase the flavor of food. So it's kind of this really wonderful synergy between flavor and function, and just in the history of food and the use of herbs in food. So I love to put black pepper in golden milk. It adds sort of a nice spice to it. And then, I usually have black pepper on eggs in the morning. Really, in North America, we're pretty familiar. It's like salt and pepper on the table. People are pretty familiar, but just consider adding it. One thing to keep in mind about pepper is if you're going to be adding black pepper to like a soup or a stew, to add it towards the end, because if you add it earlier on, it can get a bitter taste towards the end. So just at the end of soups and stews, I like to add a little acid, so lemon or vinegar or something like that is nice to add at the end, as well as a fresh olive oil or butter can be nice to add at the end and not heat up too much. And then the black pepper can be added at that time too. It's nice in curry as well. The next one that I want to talk about is rosemary. So rosemary is an herb that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It has a lovely aromatic quality, and the part of the plant that's been studied for medicinal properties has mostly been the essential oil, the volatile oils that give rosemary that lovely aroma. And so rosemary oil has been found to be anti-inflammatory and also antioxidant, analgesic, so that means pain killing, carminative, so that means it can help relieve gastrointestinal gas, antimicrobial, so again, that ability to help keep foods fresh and help reduce the microbial growth and spoilage in food, and also an expectorant, so that helps you get phlegm out when you have a cough, an antispasmodic, that helps to reduce the spasming, like for example when you have a cough, and a diuretic, so that means it helps you to pee and to release your fluids in that way. So there are a lot of wonderful qualities to rosemary, and I, for one, really enjoy the flavor of rosemary. It's something that is usually pretty easy to get a hold of, and in most places, it's pretty easy to grow. So the other ones that I've talked about so far, chili peppers are pretty easy to grow too, if you have a home garden. The seeds are readily available. Turmeric, here in the Appalachians, Southern Appalachians near Asheville, there are a lot of folks, including myself, who grow turmeric annually. It's technically a tropical plant, so you can't leave it in the ground over the winter when it freezes here because it doesn't want to freeze, but you can dig it up and then replant it the next year. So it's a little more finicky. If you're just sort of a beginning home gardener, I would start out with rosemary and chili peppers. So there are many wonderful ways to enjoy rosemary. Two of my favorites are in chicken soup and in roasted vegetables. So a lot of people are familiar with roasted red potatoes with rosemary and garlic, for example. That's delicious, but you don't have to stop with potatoes. You can do sweet potatoes, parsnips, turnips, squash, mushrooms, any kind of roasted potatoes can be really lovely with rosemary. And fresh rosemary will be less strong than dried rosemary because it has more water in it, but it's also a little more tender. So the dried rosemary can be a little pokey. It can kind of feel like you're eating a bunch of little sticks. And in a soup or even in a roasted dish, that can be a little uncomfortable on the mouth. So something that I like to do is grind up rosemary into not a super fine powder, but just break up those pointy leaves in either a spice grinder or a mortar and pestle to make that sensational eating experience a little more smooth. Another great thing to do with rosemary is to infuse it into olive oil. So you can take dried garlic, dried rosemary, and just put them in a jar, fill it up with olive oil, let it sit at room temperature for a couple of weeks, and that olive oil will have the flavors and some of the properties of both of those herbs. It's not advised to use fresh garlic, especially in fresh herbs, to make infused oils because that can mold in the oil and cause problems. So moving on, ginger is the next one I want to talk about. Oh, and I want to say, if you have questions while I'm talking, just feel free to write a comment over on the side, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. And I'll just go through everything and then take a look at the questions at the end and answer any questions that you might have, either about the inflammatory process in general, anti-inflammation, lifestyle choices, or herbs, or honestly foods that reduce inflammation too. I'm not going to get into those a lot right now, but I can share information about that too. So if you have a question, then please put it over there in the comments. So ginger is another great one, and ginger has gotten a lot of press recently with the coronavirus pandemic as also a strong antiviral. So ginger is something that, if you enjoy the heat of it, can be something that you can just increase in your diet on a day-to-day basis. It's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It also has anti-tumor and anti-cancer properties, and is almost best known in herbal medicine as a calming herb for nausea. So it can really help with stomach aches, particularly nausea, and just aiding in digestion. Ginger is easy to get. I don't know if they often have it at Bounty and Soul markets, but probably sometimes. And most of us are pretty familiar with how to use it. So a lot of stir fries and curries and soups can just start with chopping up onions, ginger, garlic, and sauteing them in some sort of fat or oil. That's a great way to start a lot of soups and stews and a lot of dishes, honestly. Some other good ways to use ginger are in a tea. So in particular, I like to make a chai style tea, and chai actually just means tea in Hindi. So masala chai is like a spiced tea. So the masala can be all kinds of delicious spices, including ginger. Turmeric can even be in there, although it's not commonly. Cinnamon, which I'll talk about in a minute. Cloves, which have their own anti-inflammatory properties. Cardamom is another great one that's really good for the digestive system, and whatever else really you like to put in your masala blend. And to make a tea out of fresh ginger, you want to either grate or slice up the ginger to be pretty small, and then simmer it for a little while. So the technical word for that is to make a decoction, rather than just pouring hot water over the ginger, because it's so dense, because it is a root, and so it's so dense. In order to extract the medicinal compounds, you really want to simmer it for a little while, rather than just steeping it with warm water hot water poured over it. So yeah, that's one of my favorite ways to take ginger, is in a masala tea blend, also in curry, which is a great place to kind of throw all of these herbs that I'm talking about. Maybe not so much the rosemary, but you could give it a try. And again, in the golden milk. So I like to put ginger and turmeric and black pepper and cinnamon in my golden milk. And in the warm season, it's nice to make a ginger lemonade. So you can either make a decoction of ginger and then let it cool down, or you can just grate fresh ginger with a fine grater, like a microplane grater, into your lemonade. And just lemon juice, ginger, lemon peel has its own wonderful qualities. So I like to put that in there too. And then a little bit of honey, or your preferred sweetener. And that can be a great cool drink during the hotter times of year. So the last anti-inflammatory herb that I want to talk about is cinnamon. And cinnamon, again, is something that we're all familiar with eating. The flavor is pretty agreeable. It's got that nice, sweet, spicy flavor that most of us have been eating since we were a kid. And it's antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. It's beneficial for the blood and blood sugar regulation in particular. It can increase our sensitivity to insulin, which is the hormone that our body makes, or excuse me, the enzyme that our body makes to help our cells absorb blood sugar and the sugar floating in our blood. So it can help to regulate blood sugar in that way. And it's indicated a lot of people take it if they have diabetes or blood sugar issues. It also has been noted for anti-cancer properties, and it's healing and soothing specifically to the lungs. So again, that's something to keep in mind during this global pandemic of coronavirus and COVID-19. It really is protective of the cilia, which are the little fingers in the lungs, and that's part of where the virus actually attaches and attacks. So increasing cinnamon, whether you're preventatively just trying to increase health in the lungs or you're actually treating, again, I'm not giving medical advice in terms of treating disease, but cinnamon is indicated for supporting the health of the cilia. It's also antimicrobial and antiviral. So really a commonplace herb that we've all taken that has a lot of really beneficial properties that maybe we didn't know about. What I like to do if I'm going to make, so I like to put cinnamon in teas. And when I do that, I don't use the ground fine powdered cinnamon. I use cinnamon chips. And this might be something that's available to you at a health food store. You can certainly order it online. I like to use Mountain Rose herbs as a source for organic herbs, including cinnamon chips. Or you can get cinnamon sticks and then break them up with a pair of pruning shears, or a knife is a little trickier, sometimes a strong pair of scissors. So that way you can steep the cinnamon and it's not like a sludge at the bottom. One of the wonderful qualities of cinnamon is that it's mucilaginous. So if you've ever made a cinnamon tea or made a sauce with cinnamon and noticed it gets really goopy and slimy, that's, it does. It makes a sort of a slimy goop or a mucilage. And that's part of how it helps protect your, and soothe your digestive system and just bring that soothing quality into your body. So yeah, when I'm making a tea, then I prefer the cinnamon chips, but the powder is great too. And one of my favorite ways to take the powder is make basically a crustless apple pie. So I just cut up slices of apple like you would to make a pie filling, and I put them in a pot with some butter or coconut oil if you're not doing butter, and just a teeny bit of water to get it simmering, a pinch of salt and cinnamon, and if you like clove or ginger, other kinds of spices, and simmer that until the apples are tender. So you're basically making a pie filling. You can add a little bit of honey or maple syrup or sweetener to taste. And then instead of going through the trouble of making the whole crust, which is quite a process and usually involves flour, which for some people is not a healthy food choice. I'm not anti-flour, but it's not for everybody. I just toast some pecans or some walnuts or some other nuts, even sunflower seeds are nice, and sprinkle those toasted nuts on top, and it gives that crunchy, roasty flavor that a pie crust would have, and just is a lovely way to eat more cinnamon and a really fun sweet treat that is pretty healthy and low sugar. You can add whipped cream to the top if that's something that you do, or coconut cream. And yeah, that's a wonderful way to increase your cinnamon consumption. So I'm not seeing any questions over to the side. So if you have any, please ask them now, because I'm wrapping up at this point. And I'm really glad to have been here with you. And I hope that in this uncertain time, and time that can feel confusing and can cause a lot of stress for a lot of us and can feel very disconnecting because of the social distancing that we're doing, I hope that that you can find some peace. You can take some deep breaths, sing, play, eat some nourishing foods, feed your body, feed your health, and that we can continue to come together, like in this kind of platform and in other ways, and continue to support each other, and sort of at this fork in the road where we can see chaos and panic in one direction and calm and resilience and mutual support in the other direction. I hope that we can all have the courage and the strength and the resources that we need to move in the direction of calm and resilience and mutual support while we're choosing the best actions to respond and the best ways to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for being supporters of Bounty and Soul. Again, I represent an organization called Wild Abundance, and you can check them out also on Facebook and at www.wildabundance.net. I guess this day and age, you don't need to put the wwws, but I did, so there you go. And we teach skills for self-sufficiency and community resilience here outside of Asheville, and we'll be actually offering some online courses as well in the coming months. So check it out, get on our newsletter, stay in touch with Bounty and Soul, and I wish for you resilient health. Thank you so much.